My name is Jim Simpson. I was the first Black Sabbath manager from the time they were called Earth. This mini podcast with Black Sabbath drummer Bill Ward, reminiscing from his Orange County, California home, is about those now far-off days back in Aston, his first encounters with music, and his early influences. It takes me back to when I first started to work with him when he was still a teenager.
My early memories of what it was like growing up in Birmingham was I come from Aston. Most of my early childhood was spent in Aston, and it was, pretty decent as far as I was concerned. There was a lot of different types of people, and what I mean by that was because there'd been a war, we had different races of people in the city, so I was used to that. There was also gangs, and I was used to that as a child.
Bill does not dwell on detail, but growing up in Aston, leaving school with no discernible career path, was certainly not easy. Bill followed his instincts and, fortunately, focused on music.
There was always music, and there was always music on Saturday nights. And pretty much on Sunday mornings we had the Boys Brigade, and that was fantastic, listening to the drummers in the Boys Brigade. We had the train station, Aston Station. It was always busy where I was born. And I remember the accordions being played all the time. And there was always music playing. I learned to play drums in Aston. I learned to play drums by listening to the big band records that we had. And also I was influenced by those Boys Brigades marching every Sunday morning, coming round the corner off the Lichfield Road onto Grosvenor Road. And I was fascinated by the colour of drums and the ropes attached to the drums and everything that makes a drum look incredible. So drums lured me in, and the Boys Brigade helped to do that. Those were like my early influences.
Those that don't know Bill might be very surprised to hear him speak of those great American big swing bands. They were his most important influence. Bill has always been an exceptional musician. He drives the band brilliantly, so it's really no surprise at all to hear where it started for him.
The music that I listened to, I think I've shared quite a bit now. It was big band jazz, and most of it was American big band jazz. Count Basie, clarinet players, Tommy Dorsey, big bands like that. That's what I had as a child, I first heard New Orleans funeral bands as well when I was a child. And I liked the soulfulness of the solo singers. And there was a darkness about the funeral bands that was really appealing to me. Those were the things that I listened to.
Broad Street has long been a particularly interesting part of this city, so it is interesting to hear Bill enthusing about his early visits. Also, how prominent that first Indian restaurant is in his memory.
Somebody finally opened up an Indian restaurant, and I remember being about 15, 16 years old and going to visit Indian restaurants for the first time, and that was pretty fantastic. The biggest adventure, my mother and I, we used to travel down Broad Street, and we go to the Hall of Records for one thing or another. But we were usually in transit on Broad Street. We were going from one place to another, to the other side of the city to visit relatives.
Broad Street, now the golden mile of Birmingham's West Side Business Improvement District, was then home to the magical George Clay Music Store. That is where many aspiring musicians in those days bought their first instruments. Bill was no exception.
And really, when Broad Street became more important than anywhere else on earth was when I went into the shop called George Clay's, which was a huge music shop on Broad Street. And that's where I bought my first kit of drums. I was just turned 16 years old, and I've been using other people's drums for a few years before that. Went into George Clay's and bought myself a Premier kit of drums, 20-inch bass drum, one small tom-tom. I don't think I had a floor tom-tom, but I had a concert tom, a couple of cymbals, a hi-hat, and I had like a 3-inch or a 4-inch wood shell Premier snare drum. And that was it. That's what I used for a number of years.
Bill recalls that seminal time when he first got to play in a band and when he first met the guitar man with whom he went on to form a partnership which became an integral part of the band that went on to single-handedly invent heavy metal music.
That's what I used in the first bands that I was in. The first band I was in was The Rest. And of course, when I was 16, that's when I met Tony. And we were looking for a lead guitar player. And quite brilliantly, Tony agreed to come and play. He could play the ass off a guitar. He was at 16. He was like incredibly good. And I thought, my God, I've got to really do some work here to even be in the same band as this guy. And that's how it started.
Quietly spoken, self-effacing and modest, Bill Ward's contribution to the success of Black Sabbath was monumental. We went through some tough times together on our mission to get the world to listen to the music. I'll not forget how constantly supportive Bill was on our journey to those 2 hit albums and their first hit single. Thanks, Bill.